The moment the plane touched down at Heathrow Airport, the four Americans already felt like they had the trip completely figured out. For them, the United Kingdom was just another place that spoke English, another country that watched the same movies, listened to the same music, and secretly admired the bold confidence Americans were known for. At least, that's what Jake kept telling his friends as they waited in the long immigration line, rolling their suitcases forward inch by inch. "Relax," he said loudly, his voice echoing across the quiet hall. "It's basically America with accents." A few travelers nearby glanced over. In the UK, people tended to keep their voices low in public places, but Jake didn't notice. None of them did. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Jake was the kind of guy who had never really been told no before. Back home in Texas, confidence usually worked in his favor. Restaurants bent rules for him. Clubs let him in without much trouble. Even at work, he had a reputation for pushing boundaries and somehow getting away with it. So when he and his friends, Tyler, Amanda, and Chris, planned a 2-week trip to London, he walked into the airport already acting like he belonged there. The others followed his lead, laughing loudly, joking about accents, and taking videos for social media before they had even passed through passport control. Tyler nudged Jake as they approached the immigration desk. "Man, imagine if they actually ask us questions like in the movies." Jake smirked. "Relax, we're Americans. They're not going to make a big deal about it." The immigration officer barely reacted to their jokes. The officer looked up calmly, eyes sharp but expression neutral. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked. Jake leaned casually on the counter. "Vacation. We're here to see London, maybe show you guys how Americans do things." It was meant as a joke. But the officer didn't laugh. In fact, the officer simply stared for a moment before stamping the passport and sliding it back. "Enjoy your stay," the officer said flatly. The tone carried no amusement at all. Outside the airport, the group immediately started filming everything for their vlog. Double-decker buses passed by, black cabs moved through traffic. Jake turned the camera toward himself and announced, dramatically, "London, we're here. Don't worry. We'll fix a few things while we're in town." Amanda laughed, though a few pedestrians nearby looked uncomfortable hearing the comment. British culture had its own unspoken rules about politeness and humility, but the Americans weren't paying attention to any of that. Their first few days in London went exactly the way Jake expected. They visited Big Ben, took selfies near Buckingham Palace, and filmed dramatic commentary about how different everything felt compared to the United States. Sometimes their jokes landed well with other tourists. Sometimes they didn't, but Jake kept pushing things further. At restaurants, he complained loudly about portion sizes. On public transport, he blasted music from his phone while recording videos. Tyler kept whispering that maybe they should tone it down, but Jake brushed it off every time. "We're just having fun," he said. Then came the night that changed everything. The group decided to celebrate their third night in London, at a pub not far from Piccadilly Circus. The place was packed with locals finishing work and tourists enjoying the atmosphere. At first, things seemed normal. They ordered drinks, tried British snacks, and joked about the names of the beers. But as the night went on, Jake's voice got louder and his jokes got more exaggerated. At one point, he stood up and raised his glass dramatically. "All right, everyone," he shouted across the pub. "Let's show London how Americans party." The pub went quiet. A few people laughed awkwardly, but most simply turned back to their conversations. The bartender leaned across the counter and calmly told Jake to sit down. "We'd appreciate it if you kept things respectful," the bartender said politely. Jake rolled his eyes. "Relax, man. We're just bringing some energy in here." That comment didn't land well. British pub culture values a relaxed social atmosphere, not loud attention-seeking displays. Chris whispered, "Dude, maybe chill." But Jake wasn't listening anymore. Within 15 minutes, the situation escalated. Jake started arguing with another customer who had asked him to lower his voice. Tyler tried to step in. Amanda looked embarrassed, and the bartender signaled security. The Americans had come to London expecting everything to revolve around them. Instead, they were suddenly being escorted outside. Standing on the sidewalk, Jake looked furious. "Can you believe that?" he said. "They kicked us out for having fun." But the problem wasn't just the pub anymore. During the argument, someone had filmed the whole scene and posted it online. By the next morning, clips of Jake yelling inside the pub were spreading across social media. The caption on one video read, "Tourists think they own the place." At first, the group laughed about it. "Free publicity," Jake said confidently. But later that afternoon, things started to feel different. When they returned to their hotel near Trafalgar Square, the front desk manager asked to speak with them privately. The manager explained that several complaints had come in about their behavior. including reports from the previous night and earlier incidents involving noise and disruption. Jake tried to joke his way through it. "Come on, we're just tourists having a good time." But the manager's expression stayed serious. "Our hotel has standards for guest conduct." The manager said, "We expect visitors to respect local rules and other guests." The conversation ended with a warning. If the behavior continued, the hotel would ask them to leave. For the first time since arriving in London, the group began to realize something important. The UK wasn't just another version of home. It had its own expectations, its own etiquette, and its own limits. But Jake still wasn't ready to admit that. That evening, they decided to film another vlog segment in a busy area near Leicester Square. Jake stood in front of the camera and started ranting about the pub incident, claiming locals were too sensitive. Unfortunately for him, a few bystanders overheard the comments. One of them pointed out that visitors should respect the culture of the country they're in. The argument that followed quickly drew attention. Police officers eventually approached the group to calm the situation. They didn't arrest anyone, but they did issue a warning about public disturbance. Suddenly, the trip that was supposed to be full of fun and viral content was turning into a string of uncomfortable encounters. The next morning, the real consequence arrived. The hotel manager informed them that their reservation was being terminated due to repeated complaints. They would need to check out immediately. Amanda looked shocked. Tyler tried to argue politely. Chris stayed silent, but Jake finally understood something he hadn't expected when the trip began. Confidence alone doesn't work everywhere. As the group rolled their suitcases back toward Heathrow Airport, the mood was completely different from when they had arrived. The excitement was gone. The jokes had stopped. London had shown them something they hadn't considered before stepping off the plane. Visiting another country means adapting to its culture, not trying to dominate it. Jake looked out the taxi window at the city skyline fading behind them. For the first time during the trip, he wasn't talking, because the place he thought he could walk into like he owned it had just shown him exactly where the limits were. And the lesson followed them all the way back home. Just when the four Americans thought the worst part of their trip was over, things somehow became even more uncomfortable. As their taxi rolled toward Heathrow Airport, nobody in the car was talking anymore. The confidence that Jake had arrived with only days earlier was completely gone. Tyler stared out the window. Amanda kept scrolling through her phone nervously. Chris sat quietly, occasionally glancing at Jake as if waiting for him to say something. But Jake stayed silent. What finally broke the silence was Amanda suddenly gasping. "Guys, you need to see this." She turned her phone around so everyone could see the screen. The video from the pub had exploded online overnight. Thousands of views had already turned into hundreds of thousands. Comments were pouring in from people across the UK and even from Americans back home. Some comments were joking, others were brutally honest. Tourists like this give everyone a bad name. Imagine visiting another country and acting like you own the place. As a Brit, we welcome visitors, but respect matters. Jake stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Just a few days earlier, he had been laughing about going viral. But this wasn't the kind of attention he expected. The video didn't show him as a confident traveler. It showed him arguing loudly, ignoring warnings, and getting escorted out of a pub. Tyler shook his head slowly. Man, this is bad. By the time they reached the airport terminal, the group looked completely different from the excited tourists who had landed there days earlier. When they first walked through Heathrow Airport, they had been loud, joking, and filming everything for their vlog. Now they were quiet. While waiting for their flight, Chris finally spoke up. "You know, maybe the problem wasn't London." Jake looked at him but didn't respond. Chris continued carefully. "Maybe we just assumed everything would work the same way it does, Ba.